we were going to recruit a student that was from a background that maybe we haven't explored before. Well, have we done the work with the city to make sure that there are places to eat, that there are all of that the student feels welcome. There's a place of worship that aligns, that, the student feels welcome when they get here at the airport, that they see things that are familiar and comfortable.
Higher education is under unprecedented pressure: financial, cultural, competitive. These forces are pushing universities to act like factories, filling seats, chasing numbers, surviving another year. But exceptional leaders refuse to accept this as the only path forward. They're building community in their own unique ways, creating places where students feel seen, known, and inspired to belong. Their stories can light the way for others navigating this transformation. These are the architects of belonging. When you think back to growing up or your formative years, what are some of the major experiences that you feel have shaped who you are today?
Absolutely. So I can start with pre-Carrie because it actually shaped my experience was shaped before I was ever born. And so
Okay.
my grandfather was a child of the Depression and only had a middle school education. At the end of seventh grade, he was the oldest boy and of a family of 8. And at the end of that year, his dad was like, we really need your help here around the house and on the farm and all of these things. And so my grandfather never got to finish his education. And so that experience, I think, gave him a life of imposter syndrome. Like he always felt like he was never quite good enough or never, smart enough, capable enough, what have you. And so growing up as a child, my dad used to talk about how education was always stressed in their household because he never got that opportunity. And so my grandfather worked 2 jobs his entire life, trying to make sure he could provide for his family, but also to be able to save a little bit because he wanted my dad and my uncle to be able to graduate from high school and maybe, just maybe, go to college. And so my dad and my uncle both ended up, I joke that they understood the assignment because they both graduated from college, got their bachelor's, but then they kept going and they both got their master's. They both got their doctorates and they both retired as university professors. So I say that to say, like, education was just part of the conversation at my household as a child all throughout my life. I remember being a kid, my dad was a professor. And so in spring, he always taught a night class. And I thought, it was a big deal that at 5, like my mom would put me in the cutest little sundress and my little sandals and a big bow in my hair, and I got to go to college. And so at age 5, like I would get to sit in the front row of my dad's college class and take notes and get to stay up past my bedtime. And I just thought I was the coolest thing in the world. But, I think that for my parents looking back, I just thought it was a cool activity. They very much saw that as a deliberate thing of wanting me to be comfortable on a college campus, to have that kind of expectation and see bigger for myself. So that education experience has fundamentally changed who I am. And my life looks very different than my dad's growing up because of that educational experience. And so I think working in higher ed is also a little bit of core to who I am because that's such a strong basis for me and really want the opportunity to help that underdog that maybe this is their one shot to really do something and they're pushing with everything they have to make it happen.
Wow. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
You grew up though, yes, as you're pointing out, like you were in the classroom watching your dad and all that stuff as a young kid, but you didn't start out your career in higher education. So
No.
maybe share a little bit, like were you thinking of following in the footsteps there, or you're wanting to do a different path? Yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
So I very much wanted journalism. I knew that that's, what I wanted to do. I'm intrinsically drawn to do things that matter and to do purposeful work. And so that's where I ended up in the journalism space. I ended up going to the same university where my dad taught. I was determined not to be Dr. Harris's daughter. So like I wouldn't speak to him in the halls. My dad would joke that I would come up, he'd see me at the end of the month when I was hungry and out of money and wanted him to like take me to lunch and do my laundry off. For my mom to do it. So I very much wanted my own experience in college. And so like I wouldn't talk to him in the hallways. I would kind of do my own thing. And I was a journalism student. And then after graduation, I had an internship at a TV station in North Carolina, and I interned with them throughout the summer, and then they had an opening and they hired me to come on and work for them. And so I was a TV producer at a top 50 market. And so what a good experience about having to make decisions and news judgment and all of that. And did that for a couple of years and enjoyed the work, but I just kind of always felt there was a calling that I wanted something bigger and something even more impactful. And then had an opportunity to get a master's at my alma mater. There was an opening for a grad assistantship. And so I took that and then ended up working at the college after that and never left higher ed, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is that calling? What's your why for you in higher ed?
Yeah, I think for me, it's really about trying to make a difference in the lives of our students. So many of our students have, especially in Arkansas, there are a lot of folks that are first generation students. They're questioning, can they do this? Are they capable enough? They have, I think, some of that same imposter syndrome that I saw in my grandfather growing up. And so for me, my why is to really give them the confidence and to help them know what UA Little Rock's experience is going to be about so that they can say confidently, yes, that's the place that's going to help support me and help me be successful. Because at the end of the day, that's what we really want, is that student to have a good experience, to dream bigger for themselves than they ever thought possible, and then to graduate and to have the tools, the network, the contacts, and the work ethic to go out there and make a difference in the world. And to see students have that aha moment from when they come in as a freshman to when they graduate, I get chills every time I talk about it.
Yeah. Do you, less question on this and then we'll
Okay.
move on. Yeah. I just want to dig just slightly deeper. Do you feel like your why has shifted at all? Is that your present why, or was that your why when you first got into higher education? Like, as you look ahead into whatever the remaining part of your career may be, what is it that's kind of keeping you so invested?
I think for sure, I think my why has expanded. I don't know that it's changed, but I think it's expanded.
Okay.
I think that piece is always going to be central to who I am. It's just kind of a core value of mine of being drawn into that. But I think as I've gotten into the CMO suite and in that more leadership role, I also have a really big why of helping my team. And, I try to be a leader that help set them up for that next thing. We have a professional development plan that our team does where we're talking about what is it they want to be? Where do they see themselves in 3 years and 5 years? And how can we help get them there? And I think that's become a part of my why that I never really saw initially as, that first job in social media. I really saw it about the students. I didn't see that leadership piece, but I think that's a huge part of what I want my legacy to be, as someone that helps that team look at the great things that they can do, see more in themselves, and help grow our team as well in terms of their talent, their skills, and their abilities.
Yeah. And just to shift to the present day, all things beautiful are beautiful because they get tested, and their beauty,
I like that saying,
transcends. Yeah. So let's talk about the present day and where what higher ed is going through. There's a reckoning, there's colleges that are closing, and there's a multitude of pressures that are, testing the industry, testing people's why, like yourself. But what is the impact that you see from where you sit and in terms of the reckoning that higher education is going through?
Yeah. I think the impact of higher ed, all the data says that it's still, one of the best investments that a person can make in themselves. And I think as we think about some of the pressures and some of the challenges that higher ed faces, I think those are all, things that come back to from a Marcom space of being able to talk about the impact, being able to talk about the value, being able to really share some of those things. We've got students on our campus that came in as very Pell eligible students. They're getting great degrees and they're going to go out and be able to be successful. And I think being able to talk about that in real ways and being able to say, here's a student that's out there, here's what they're achieving. Some of the other things that we've done that I think really show that impact is we know that we are a driver for Little Rock, and we're better because of Little Rock. Little Rock's better because of us. And so we've done some research on who are the top employers of our graduates. And so we've built relationships and pipelines and conversations with those folks to make sure that they understand and they see the impact of hiring our graduates, but also that they understand the community impact that we have. I think one of the things that's super cool, we have a program, and it's pretty unique. It's called the Corporate Partner Program. So it's something I think we're really proud of, is continually finding ways to make sure that the community sees our importance and sees the impact we make and how we're a good partner. And I think if institutions really focus on being really clear about that work, I think that goes a long way in helping kind of attack some of those challenges that higher ed is facing.
Do you feel then that the reckoning of higher education, people questioning if it's worth it or should I go, the value of it, is it fair? Or do you feel like there's a disconnect that just hasn't been visible? Yeah, just curious as to how you think about that.
I think being at so two things. I think one, I'm in a regional public institution, and I think that is a very different thing than being at, an Ivy or one of these really long-standing institutions. And so I want to start with that separation. I think for a regional public, we don't have the national brand recognition that some of the other places do. But I think what we do really well is community impact and community engagement. And so I think that's something that some of the other institutions can learn from regional publics about, is how do we tell that story within our community and the impact that we're making and the way that we're changing lives? Because I think regional publics and community colleges are some of the best people that do that work. And I think as a whole, our industry could do a stronger job talking about that impact in our community. And I think that's something that if everybody could really hone in on that, I think we could be really strong. I think about I don't know if you remember, but back in the 90s, the milk industry was really struggling and dairy farmers quit competing with each other and kind of came together in this idea of the Got Milk ad campaign. And I think higher ed sometimes competes with each other too much. How cool would it be if we did something similar and just talked about the value collectively? So if you know somebody amazing that can make that happen, super cool. But I think that's the kind of thing that, sometimes we're in too much of competition with one another and we don't always talk about the overarching societal good that we do.
Can you just tell us what are we going through in the industry? Like what is this reckoning? Like what are we going through? Maybe some people don't understand what higher education is going through right now, but I feel like you have a grasp. I mean, you've studied one of the pressures, so yeah.
For sure. So the enrollment cliff, I'll start with that. And that starts at kind of 2025 and goes through 2037. Some models push it back as far as 2040. It's termed the enrollment cliff and so that is in the traditional college age student, that first time in college right out of high school, there are 350 to 400,000 fewer students. Carrie's a data dork. And so she looked at the math of that. It's about a $4.2 billion impact to our industry. And so those are students that if you go back 17, 18 years, it ties to the recession in 2007, 2008. And so we all of a sudden had people that decided to put having families on hold. At the same time they did that, society kind of changed around this idea of having kids. And so the birth rate never recovered for several years. So that's kind of that's one pressure. I think at the same time, we start to see changes in the makeup of students going to college. And so you see more first generation students, you see more students from varying backgrounds. And so what the data tells us is that even on its own, those students without any additional support, just by being first generation, are about 33% less likely to graduate from college without any additional support. So not only do we have fewer students, but now we have students that need additional support to get across the finish line. So additional support is going to mean that, that's probably going to cost more to graduate that student in terms of, remediation or in terms of tutoring, all of those kinds of services. So we have fewer students. Getting a student across the finish line in some cases is going to cost more. And then we have increased competition for the fewer students that we have. So I think that's kind of the overarching landscape of what we're seeing is those kind of three things. And so that increased competition in first time college student then creates scenarios we look at, adult learners or transfer students or, students who have stopped out and trying to get them to come back and finish. And so opening up other avenues that haven't been as much of a focus for some institutions. How'd I do in a nutshell on that?
That was a great. Maybe you wrapped up your doctorate yesterday. I don't know. Yeah, very top of mind. What worries you most then? Like you've very succinctly have called out a few pressures there that are driving this. There's actually like we've had other guests on the series here that they've named out even other pressures beyond that. What worries you then about the way that institutions today are responding to it? For myself and Lungi here, we've talked about this factory model type reaction where universities, as you're kind of pointing out, there's numbers changing. So then they start to get really hyper-focused on the numbers at the expense of kind of everything else.
Yeah.
What do you see? What's kind of your perspective?
Yeah. I think the thing that gives me the most heartburn is the experience. So, a good example of this is we start to see institutions that maybe look at new markets that they want to go after, whether that's a certain demographic of student, a certain geography of a student. And I think there can be a desire to explore that without putting in all of the pieces of that puzzle. So for instance, if we were going to recruit a student that was from a background that maybe we haven't explored before. Well, have we done the work with the city to make sure that there are places to eat, that there are all of the, that the student feels welcome. There's a place of worship that aligns, that, the student feels welcome when they get here at the airport, that they see things that are familiar and comfortable. And I think building kind of that full experience for a student isn't something that happens overnight. That takes time to do. And so I think it's trying to find the balance of, being aspirational in markets that we want to explore, but also making sure that we set that student up for success so that when they get on our campus, when they get in our community, they feel like they're being welcomed. And I think trying to find that balance is the thing that probably is scary and the most stressful to me of, it a little bit becomes the chicken or the egg, which thing comes first, but they kind of have to go together to really set that student up for success and to make sure that they and their family have a good experience.
Yeah, that's insightful. One of the things that Allison said when she was on as well, is she was worried that the industry is going to be too late, like to realize that we need to make these changes. Like for you, for instance, like the experience matters, and that's what's giving you heartburn. And one of Allison's worries was that the industry is going to realize these things too late, like the ones that you're mentioning right now. How does that settle with you?
I don't know. I wrestle with that. But maybe it's because we're an enrollment driven institution that we are really thinking about experience all the time. I remember those phrases and I've heard them, in the last month. Every student counts and every student matters. And so I think, maybe there are some institutions that aren't that focused on it. But just from my seat, I think we really are thinking about experience. And I hope that the industry does that. Higher ed has, much like so many other things, it will change and it will over time and it will morph into things that maybe look a little bit different here and there. But like so many other things, I really and truly think it has a purpose and I think it serves a good. And I hope that it stays forever. I feel like our institution is really focused on that. And I feel like a lot of folks are. So I'm maybe going to try to go really glass half full and say that we're going to figure this out because I just feel like it's so important. And maybe that's my own frame of reference coming into it that we've got to do this because our industry and our world needs us.
You're the optimist and Allison's the
pessimist.
I
totally am.
Is what you're saying.
I am 100% the optimist.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about like what the transformation is then. It feels like you're a big believer that focusing on the experience of the student
for sure
is kind of the way forward for higher education. Do you feel like that is not to like overgeneralize, but do you feel like that is the transformation that, other schools, they should be thinking about? This is something that you guys do have
Yeah.
a keen focus on. Is that what you would maybe recommend or feel like is the proper transformation, or is there something else out there that you feel like is
No,
a guiding light for people?
I think it's a huge part of it. We live in an Amazon focused world. Students and our employees, our community are trained to the idea that, we want something and 2 days later it's on our doorstep. And I think that experience, and then if we have an issue, there's great customer service to get it back. They're easy to work with. I love shoes from Zappos from the same reason. They're great. I get great quality, but they also make the experience really pleasant and easy to work with if I have an issue. And I think we live in a world that's what society has come to expect. It's an immediate thing. And so if we've got, first time in college students that have questions and it's 3, 4, 6 days before they hear from us, what kind of experience does that tell them? So I think every detail about how we communicate, when we communicate, all of that, it has to be personalized to the things that they've told us they're interested in. It has to be timely. It has to have really quick follow up and check in. And it has to feel personal to them that we have had a conversation. They've told us what they're looking for, and we're following back up in meaningful ways. I think that experience piece probably matters to this generation more than ever because they've been marketed to their whole life. So they know what marketing is and they know when they're being marketed to. So they want that experience that feels authentic.
Okay. So experience is one of the major things that can help
Yeah.
the transformation in higher ed. I'm going to pull something out that I was reading when I was chomping on some snacks last night from one
Ooh.
of your blogs in 2024.
Oh, goodness. Okay. It's been a minute.
Yeah, the blog was Why I Love Higher Ed. And
Yeah.
one of the 4 things that you named was community.
Mhm.
And the idea that, you love that in higher ed, everyone is willing to share, teach, learn from each other. And this sense of community was something that you valued. So if we think about experience as one of those things that is needed for the transformation, what is the role for you that community plays as well in what we are experiencing right now in terms of the pressures? What role is community playing in our response?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I think community does a couple of things. I think one is let's learn from each other. If there's a school somewhere else that's really figured out how to personalize that student experience or how to create opportunities for students to find their own community, let's learn from each other. We we need to be sharing best practices. We need to be sharing resources. We need that piece of it. And so I think that's a big part of it. But I also think community has a role to talk about the impact that we make broadly. You know, that whole idea I was talking about somewhat earlier of how we need to really come together and tell the stories that we have. I think that's a huge part of community and being able to say, you're doing great work, we're doing great work. It doesn't have to be an either or. It can be an and equation. Like it doesn't have to be an equation that if a student, I think about my own experience. I have degrees from multiple institutions. All of those institutions played a great part in my life. They all in various ways taught me skills that I use every day. They all set me up for success. So when I talk about my own experience, it doesn't have to be this school or that school. I can be a donor to all of those schools. I can benefit from all of those schools. I can advocate for all of those schools. And I think tapping into that mentality around community, I think is also something that's really important and something that we can continually do more of.
How, in particular, like the extension of community on campus into the surrounding community? And yes, you were talking about these corporate partners. How does that come into the play? And you can take this wherever you want, but
Yeah.
just curious as to like what you've been seeing in terms of the success or even like the dialogue
Yeah.
between people that aren't at the university, but they're in like the surrounding community. Yeah, just share
Yeah,
about that a
for
little bit.
sure. So I think it's been good for us both. Like, I think it helps the community and that they've got an affordable opportunity to reskill, upskill, right? But we also have really benefited from hearing from them. So we had all of the corporate partners on campus last week. Just we hosted a lunch and gave them updates about campus so that they could be our champions and know things that we're doing. But we also were using that to sit down with our folks in workforce and have some follow-up conversations with those corporate partners and make sure that our curriculum is aligned, make sure that we're providing, non-credit opportunities for those partners. Are there things that you're needing for future graduates to know about? And so it really starts to have an advisory capacity for us to make sure that we're building curriculum that our workforce needs. But also if there are things, AI is a great example. We were approved last Friday to have the first bachelor's in AI. So we'll be the first one in our area in our state to have something like this, which is a big deal. And that will start in the fall. But we also know that's going to take a couple of years to get students out into the workforce in that. So our corporate partners have been telling us we need things now. And so we have our workforce and continuing ed has been doing several different AI courses now to help those employers already who are out there. But we've also heard from them, we need students who know how to build AI, who know how to create these things. And so like that's a really good example of how that corporate partner piece, we can attack challenges that they have on both sides of that. And so I think it's helped us be better as an institution to build that community around what our local workforce needs and what's going to set them up for success.
Awesome. Love the power of that community and how you all are using it. I mean, we, as you know, we believe in community. In fact, we actually, we think the transformation needed in higher education should lean into community and take the opportunity to understand what drives a sense of belonging for the constituents, for the university. In our thinking around that, are we missing something in the way that we're thinking around community as the way to transform higher education to a better state? Are we missing anything?
Ooh, I think that I don't know that you're missing it, but I think the thing is community can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And so I think it's really important to think about community at the micro level of, that community relationship that students have in their major or with a faculty member and that piece of community, but then also pulling that out even at the macro level of how does community look for an institution within its area of emphasis and in its town and its surrounding area. And so I don't know that you're missing anything, but I think it's really important to look at community at a lot of different layers. And I think sometimes we hear community and we just think one or the other, and we don't think about both of those and how they kind of intersect.
That's awesome. Thinking about these different layers then.
Okay.
You talked about Little Rock as a campus, right? That you had this enrollment decline for over 10 plus years. And then you led this effort, which was kind of like an institutional turnaround to actually reverse the enrollment. This is not a simple thing to do. And as you're calling out, there are multiple layers to thinking about like community transformation and all that. So curious as to just hear about what you felt like moved the needle. And yeah, maybe this is coming from like a marketing comms perspective, but very curious to hear like what you felt was kind of really, really influential in doing that.
So a couple of things. First off, it takes everybody kind of rowing in the same direction to do something like this. And so our chancellor, the folks in our enrollment division, and the folks in our advancement division all kind of bought into this along with our work in marketing and comms. And so I think that was a big key on the front end is we weren't all, fundraising for different things and weren't trying, our marketing was aligned with where our enrollment management plan was looking at. And so I think all of that helped. And our chancellor was really setting vision for that. But, it really started with how do we attack affordability? And that goes back to knowing your community. And for us, affordability was the biggest challenge that we faced. We were one of the more expensive schools in the state, and we knew that we had to find a way to come at that and make that more reasonable for students. Again, we have a high first generation student population. And so that was a big piece of it. And so we worked with our colleagues in advancement and figured out some ways we could do that and help through some funding that they were able to bring to the table. And so we were able to get our affordability message much stronger. And then we had to tell people about it. The institution had, because of declining enrollment, there was a lot of bad news that came out. And so we really leaned in on how do we build relationships with our media partners? How do we get the good news out there? Not just this affordability news, but how do we get lots of things out there? And so I've spent a lot of time building those relationships so that all the wins that we have, people are willing to talk about now, which helps to turn kind of that perception around the institution. And then we had to get folks on campus. And we found that if we could get them to campus, whether that was a student, whether it was a donor, they were amazed at some of the transformation that they saw. And so that was really a big piece that we had to focus on and make part of our strategy. And it's worked, but it has taken everybody kind of all seeing that one big picture and being able to attack their piece of it. And let's collaborate together. I get excited too, because I look at how many opportunities I think we still have. And I don't think we're done yet. And so it's really fun to be at a place that is hungry to tackle a big challenge like that and willing to sit down and work through it together. I was in a text chain this morning with our partners in the enrollment space, and I was saying, hey, I've got some dollars that we can do this thing. Which of these is going to have the biggest impact? And they were like, oh my gosh, thank you for even being willing to come to the table and let's talk through it. We want to look at some data on our end. And it's not a your thing or a my thing, it's a our thing together. And I think that shared ownership of the challenge and the shared ownership of the solution across the institution has really made a difference.
Awesome. That's a great turnaround. Sounds like a lot of collaborative work as well to make that happen.
Absolutely.
So part of the reading also surfaced.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a blog that you wrote for Enrollify.
Yeah.
It was leading while learning, or I think,
Mm-hmm.
and it was talking about AI. I
Yeah.
took a paragraph or a sentence from that I thought was quite
Okay.
interesting. You said that the pace of innovation is faster than anything we've seen before, and waiting to fully understand AI risks falling behind. And I underlined this sentence. At the same time, growing pressure to demonstrate higher education's value has positioned AI as a lever for doing more with less.
Yeah.
So how does AI demonstrate higher ed's value? And how do we make sure that it doesn't, strip out the human connection? How are you seeing AI?
Yes. AI, I think, is a tool and a thought partner. It should never be in a place that it's doing our judgment for us. I think that is something that is uniquely human, and setting strategy is never going to be a spot where I feel comfortable using AI. I think AI has the opportunity to routinize some of those mundane things that inadvertently take a lot of our time out, that then allow us to focus on the relationships, that allow us to focus on the strategy, and allow us to do that meaningful work, which is uniquely human, really, really well. And so that's how I like to think about AI and how I'm trying to use it.
And as a follow-up to that, how do you feel like that blends into this talk track that we've been having today about the experience for students?
I think AI is an important thing. I also can tell sometimes when people send me things and I'm like, AI wrote that email. And so I think it's really, if we're going to use it, I like to tell our team they all have an AI goal this year as one of their goals, because I think it's something that we've got to be using and feel comfortable with. But I think it should be used much like an intern. I would never take a project that I had an intern work on and turn it into somebody or send it for prime time without spending some time at it, looking at it, reviewing it. And I think AI should be used in very much the same way. It's a great tool to partner with to help take some of those routinized tasks, but it shouldn't be you do a thing and then just turn it in and the student gets this very AI written email and it feels like an AI written email. I think it can do a really good job of personalizing it in some key ways and building something that feels personal at scale if we're working back and forth with it in intentional ways. We have some custom GPTs on our end that help us with that are built specifically with our brand pillars and brand messaging. So it helps that consistency be a little bit more baked in. But even still, we have to be looking at that work before we just use it full scale, because otherwise that I think has the potential to dilute the experience.
Yeah. Okay, Carrie, we're gonna, just to be respectful of your time, we're gonna start moving towards the end of our conversation, which
Okay.
we do quickfire questions here.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Here's the planner. I'm a
hey,
thinker. You're making me stress.
guess what? The good thing is that if you need a minute to think about the question, we can edit it so it looks like you were just right on it. Okay. When you reflect on legacy, what is the legacy that you hope to leave behind in higher education?
I want to leave it better than I found it. You know, higher ed has meant so much to me. It's meant so much to my family. And I want the opportunity to leave the place better than I found it. And I hope I do that through my team and setting them up as future leaders. I hope I do that through helping our institution at this really critical juncture in its time. But like we have a scholarship we have actually two scholarships in my dad's name at institutions he was affiliated with. And my husband and I have a scholarship that we've created. And so I hope through all of those ways, I leave it better than I found it.
Okay, there was no editing needed on that one.
I did okay.
You
one down.
1 second in, and you had the answer. Lungi, take the next one.
All right, I'll take it. Okay, if the entire higher education industry stopped right now, went quiet, and they all listened to you, what would you say in one statement?
Remember the people. Like, I think the people are what make, our students, our faculty. I think people and the experience that people create are really important. So focus on the people. And I think that's going to get us on the right track to anywhere that we needed to go in that situation.
Nice. I feel like you played us. These are
very well said.
Very well said and quick.
Now, like 4 hours later, I'll have like a million other things. Like, man, why didn't I say this? But we're doing okay.
That's okay.
And then our last one, who's another leader you admire in higher education? Someone who we should also think about bringing onto this.
Yeah, I'm going to say Bailey McCohen. She is the executive director of advancement and marketing at Paris Junior College in Texas. And I think the work they have done as a junior college to make sure that their message is out there and make sure they're doing great things is phenomenal. And I would put her in my list of people to talk to.
Awesome. Great. That is our quickfire. Woo, that was pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Well, Carrie, that wraps things up. So
thank you so much. This was fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.